Welcome back. Now that our journey is complete, I think we could have a nice recap of our adventure. Our whole base is located in a single self-sufficient dimension. Here there is no rain, no mob spawn, and it's always day. We received this place as a reward when we built our first rocket, and this is the main hall of the building in the middle of our base. Here we have a screen that will show us the charge of our main battery, some monitor terminals to keep an eye on the amount of fuel, and some for the endgame stuff. Talking about storage and craftings, our main AE2 controller is right above us. To manage all of its channels in an easier way, we used a tight mix of peer-to-peer and wireless connectors to get all of the controller facades on a nice wall. We can see all of the channels with our network visualizer, but that doesn't really help us that much while working in that location. Here we also have all of our crafting CPUs. We have different sizes, but the biggest ones are those towers equipped with singularity crafting storages. Those can hold crafting orders up to 8 exabytes. While we will never get close to that amount, they are helpful when doing huge orders that would otherwise need too big conventional CPUs. All of those CPUs are also doing some crafting self-started. Those are not from crafting cards or level emitters but from level maintainers. With those it is easy to keep a stock of what we want and, when needed, request a craft with a specific batch size. Next to that we have our main generic storage. And, to manage all of those items, we ended up using the artificial universe storage cells. But this is just our main AE2 system, which mostly manages on-demand craftings. The patterns for the stuff we use in huge amounts have all been multiplied a lot, and, instead of using interfaces, we input materials directly inside the machines with the embedded crafting buffers. Those are blocks that can be used when building the mid to late game multi-blocks. And, when we craft huge amounts of early game materials, we can see that the main limitation is integer 32, and that we can process those amounts of items in a single tick. Also, you can now guess how we ended up needing 8 exabyte storage crafting units. This was our main AE2 network, but not the only one. We have countless sub-networks for all kinds of purposes, such as assembly lines of all kinds. But we also have another huge and spread network, the mass-produced storage one. This one will manage all of the resources produced and processed in unlimited amounts. And it still uses digital singularity cells. Most of our raw resources come from this Eye of Harmony. With its 211 astral array fabricators, it works with a 16,000 parallel multiplier. And it will produce about anything we could need. The biggest exception is probably a random. This material is a weird thing that could be produced by fusing together 2 plates, but we are getting it as an ore from a space elevator. From a space elevator we are also pumping all kinds of fluids which we could need. Also, we still have some void miners in the deep dark, just to integrate with any possible ore that can be seen in any eye. The ones we care about are processed in integrated ore facilities, while the rest is stocked up in yet another sub-network. To power all of that stuff, we are using the shielded Lagrangian annihilation matrix. To fuel it, we use antimatter, 5 millions at a time, which will output energy in bursts of almost integer 64 energy units at a time. We store that energy in a wireless energy network, which has a really huge capacity. Our generator, to run, uses antimatter as fuel. To produce such fuel we use 24 semi-stable antimatter stabilization sequences. And this is a multi-block with some peculiar requirements. The most important thing to know is that it needs the same amount of antimatter in each hatch and that it will keep randomly changing the value in its hatches. To keep it under check, we use SFM and a bunch of covers. And the production will also use some quite expensive materials to make a decent amount of antimatter. To boost the production, we also had to make a dedicated Naquada fuel production facility, all done with A2 hatches and subnetworks to reach high enough crafting speeds. For power generation we also have 100 Dyson spheres, but those are no longer loaded since the power production is negligible. And now we can step outside and start having a look at the machines in our base, starting from the light bulb on top of our main building, the Forge of the Gods. That huge thing is used to work materials at high temperatures. The main structure can host 4 different modules that can do different kind of tasks. The first one is just a better blast furnace, the second one acts more like a blast smelter, melting materials down to liquid form. The real advantage here is that we no longer need vacuum freezer. The third module can turn any element into plasma. This will offer alternatives to fusion recipes and often reduce the amount of needed steps. And we can also use it to make plasmas that fusion can't make. The last module can only make 2 recipes, magmatter and quark gluon, and the reason NEI looks weird on those 2 crafting recipes is because this is a really particular processing mechanic. To make magmatter, the machine will start by giving us 2 fluids, we have to calculate the difference, multiply it by 144 and give it back as plasma of the material of a tiny dust the machine also gave us. For the quark gluon, we start with some random elements and we have to send back plasma equivalent to 9 times what the machine gave us. The working speed and efficiency of all of those modules can scale up with the upgrades that we can unlock in a skill 3 inside the main controller of the structure. Those skills are unlocked by using graviton shards, points that are earned by reaching milestones in the usage of the machine. And this is not the only place where we have to face automation minigames. The other complex tasks are given by the waterline. Here we have an 8-step process for filtering water. But let's see those steps one at a time. The first step is a clarifier, which will simply use filters to remove the big particles suspended in our dirty water. The second step is ozonation. We inject some ozone in the water to take out some of the contaminants that react with it. The only challenge here is to pick the right size of input hatch and keep it filled up. The next step is flocculation, which consists of adding some flocculant to aggregate and then collect suspended particles. And here things starts to get interesting, because we have to insert the flocculant in perfect multiplies for it to work properly. But it's not too hard, we can ensure the insertion of a perfect amount with a bunch of covers. Next we have to correct the acidity of our water in a pH neutralization plant. Here we will be adding some alkaline or acid stuff to correct the pH. To automate that process we can use the embedded pH sensors and some basic redstone control. Once we neutralize the pH of our water, we have to do some thermal cycles to ensure no weird stuff is left inside it. To do so, we blast it with helium plasma above the temperature of the sun and then cool it down to absolute 0. Here, to keep the temperature in check we use SFM, with an external dummy item to keep track of the heat cycles. That will leave some ions in the water, so we have to use laser to shoot those out of our water. But we have to do that with different lenses in the correct order and with the correct timing. Luckily we have a sensor that will make swaps easy. Next we have the decontaminant degasser unit, which will have random made-up issues just to add an extra challenge. This machine can't express its feelings properly, the best it can do is try to communicate with us in binary. So we hired another SFM controller to talk with her. Finally, we have the absolute baryonic perfection purification unit. That machine will fix every subatomical particle out of position contained in our water. To automate this, we have built a setup that will first prepare some quark-releasing catalysts in a specific order and then, one by one, insert those inside the machine. But our redstone and automation challenges aren't done yet. We also had to manage black holes. This machine is mostly a powerful compressor, but there are some recipes that require a strength that only a black hole can achieve. To make this machine work, we first have to open a black hole inside it with a black hole seed. However, this black hole will slowly shrink, becoming less and less stable. To halt that process we can add some space-time to the machine, but the cost of space-time will keep increasing exponentially. And, when the black hole is at its most unstable phase, it will manage to compress 4 times as many items at once. And, when the upkeep cost becomes too high, we can close the black hole with a collapser. To properly manage all the different recipes we are going to do and the correct insertion of the items, we have designed a proper redstone circuit. We have 2 different ones, with different timer settings. And we also have 2 extra black hole compressors to passively make eternal singularities. Next we can check out the assembly lines. The oldest 14 are for generic craftings. Here we do all the recipes we need in small amounts. The data sticks with the unlocked recipes are kept in chained data banks that are connected by optical fibers. And here we have a collection of stuff we almost never craft and thus got removed even from this set of assembly lines. On the contrary, stuff we need often but is really hard to craft is made in the nearby advanced assembly lines. Here we use way more energy and we craft small batches of expensive stuff. And even with all of those overclocks it still takes a while to craft those time-intense parts. To manage the parallelization of the assembly line, we have a slightly more complex item feeding system which has an A2 subnetwork for each slice of each assembly line. Overclocking isn't efficient, so, for stuff that doesn't take as much time and we need in bigger amounts we have a different setup. We have 8 lines of 8 assembly lines, with each line sharing the same inputs. And those are almost always constantly crafting lots of things. But there was one thing which we needed in way bigger amounts that this setup wouldn't keep up with: circuits. For those we made 88 assembly lines sharing the same inputs. But even that still wasn't enough. The storage for our queued up craftings were constantly full. So we started making extra building dedicated to each circuit. The next thing that caused some inventory management issues were our dimensionally transcendent plasma forges. We have 60 of those. 36 of those are working on-demand crafting provided by the crafting buffer linked in our base. The other 24 are passively doing stuff using the convergence module which otherwise we wouldn't be able to keep up with. Finally, there are many machines we had to build in huge amounts to keep up with the processing demands. Most of those don't have any particularly hard mechanic to showcase, so I think we can just fly around and have a look. If you want to have a look by yourself and inspect anything you want, you can download the save in the video description. Next to the spawn you should be able to find a chest with all of my equipment. If you want the minimap to be complete, I also included Jowlery map files. Once you are ready, you can use the relocator to relocate to the base. Now, before you do anything, there are a couple of things you should know and check. The wireless energy battery is linked to a player. I don't know how it works in single player, but I assume you'd still have to join my network if you wanted to use wireless energy for any modification you could want to try. If the quest book command doesn't work, you can just rebuild the controller of the main power generator. Just make sure it now has your name and to turn on wireless mode. One other thing you might won't be able to use is AE2. In that case, rebuild the security terminal and then relink the wireless terminal. Next, sometimes, while loading backups, the waterline could stop working. In that case, just turn on the main controller. Other times, the forge automations will get stuck. If that is the case, remove the fluids from the afflicted setup and reset the minigame. This rarely happens, so make sure it is stuck before being the cause of the issue. I probably forgot other things, just ask in the comments. Bye bye.